Well, we're good to go. Hi, everybody. My name is Man Martin, and these are panelists as boys and girls on the side. It's focused on the minor characters in our stories. I'm sort of going to go left to right clockwise on my screen. So with us, we've got Andy Davidson, whose most recent book is The Hollow Land, and he writes sort of Southern Gothic horror. He's been compared to William Faulkner. Kimberly Brock is sort of the odd one out. She's the only panelist here besides myself who doesn't write horror. I would say she's been praised by Patty Callahan Henry. I would say you're sort of generally in the region of romance. I don't want to use that a pejorative. No, you say no.
No, it has a romantic element to it, but it's Southern book club, and this is definitely historical fiction.
Okay, yeah, her most recent book is what is it? Oh shoot. I can't read my own handwriting.
The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare.
Book of Eleanor Dare, which tells a multi-generational story beginning with the Lost Colony. And Evie Knight, who is the winner of the Bram Stoker Award for Horror, writes fiction with badass feminist characters, is how it was described. And her most recent story, somehow the word pink stands out. 3 days in the Pink Tower. I don't know. Pink is an interesting word choice in there. So we're talking about, and myself, I'm Man Martin. This is my most recent novel, The Lemon Jello Syndrome, a great gift for all occasions. So we're talking about minor characters, but I thought we'd start by talking about all characters. I assume that your process is the same for both. And again, maybe we'll just go counterclockwise this time, starting with Evie. Like, how do you go about creating a character and fleshing it out? What are some general procedures?
So I think one of the first things that I try to do with my character is I just want to figure out what they like, age, basic, what I would see if I ran into them on the street, like the very first thing I would see, because that's sort of where we make our first impressions of anybody. You know, we might be completely wrong and completely off, but that's really where we first meet somebody, at least in our mind, right? So for me, that's one of the first things. I just want to get down to what does this person look like in my head, and how do they talk, how do they move, that sort of thing. And a lot of times I'll start with, I have a basic idea and I'll kind of do a image search on Google, sometimes for celebrities, sometimes just, stock photo stuff, find somebody that meets that. And then basically I create somebody from that, like what the impression I got from that, or where I know I want them to go in that story. And then I just start kind of working around that. Like what would be interesting if this particular person had these mannerisms or these habits or things like that. So, and yeah, that's kind of how I do it. When I write, I'm seeing the scene almost play out like a movie. So it's really important for me to kind of cast my characters when I go to write something.
Right. So have your minor characters ever surprised you? Like you have a character that comes from this particular stock image, and yet it turns out there's someone very different?
Yeah, for sure. Which I think is exactly what happens, right? We all have these first impressions, and sometimes we're completely off and they surprise us. So.
Right. So Kimberly, tell us about your process for developing characters.
I love that idea that you have a first impression and then you find the character as you're writing into them. I'm such a weirdo with this. I can never do that. I can never find like an actor. People ask, how would you cast? Who would we cast? I'm terrible at that. And I'll spend way more time than I should trying to find an image that looks like. And I have a background in theater. So I have this weird, I start with, I hear them. I hear it comes from voice and dialogue in my head. And then I sort of do this thing. I spend more time, I think, in my head when I write than I do at my computer anyway. I kind of stomp around in that person. I find them as I move through my day, and I think about how they would move and how they would react to things. And, I'll just be going through my daily routine or at the grocery store, and you're always playing with the idea of your characters. And I think I inhabit them that way before I ever write them down. And secondary characters are easier for me to do that with for some reason. They're always the quirkier and the more colorful characters when I plot a book. My main character is much harder, but my secondary characters kind of come that way to me more quickly.
Do you think if you made your major characters as quirky as some of your minor characters, it would tip the story over? Like,
Yeah, I do. And honest to God, when I start a book, I always think, damn it, why is this not my main character? It's so much easier, right?
right,
And I have gotten rid of secondary characters because they're more, they overpower my main characters sometimes.
I want to return to that thought. So Andy, tell us your process in general for creating any character.
I keep a notebook, with any project that I start. And so sometimes it begins with the world. It begins with setting, usually for me, or a place that I want to write about. And then I just sort of imagine, okay, who are the people in this place? But it's kind of messy. Like, there's no clear way of doing it. Ultimately, when I finally latch on to who the story is about, I mean, sometimes it's like right out of the blue, bolt of lightning. Oh, I know this is going to be a story about an orphan who lives on the river because I want to write about this particular thing. And what it's like when that person encounters this situation. But sometimes it starts with a name. Sometimes it starts with an image of a character or a person doing something, and it's kind of a mystery or intriguing to me. Like, I'll start making notes. What is this person doing this? Why is this person doing this? Ultimately, it's just kind of sort of circling around until finally I lock onto the question of, what does this character want? And once I know what a character wants out of life, out of the next 3 days, whatever the book is going to be, I can start building character around the character's action. So, like, for me, character is very much about, what does a character do? And that tells me who they are. How would they react to a certain situation? That tells me who they are.
Hamlin Bird put out something that I think is interesting, and I was wondering if you guys would respond to it. Hamlin, I assume you're a man. I don't know your gender. But Hamlin says, I live with my characters for a while before writing, getting familiar with them. Stephen King in Misery, his author in that book had a thing called a concordance, where he had all the details, right? It's actually, I sort of suspect that was fiction, like he writes that way. I don't know, I haven't read his process. How much do you have to know about your character's minor or major? And do you have any sort of separate document where you store, for example, pictures, bits of scrap dialogue, background, and things like that? And we'll start with you, Andy, and work our way backwards. And by the way, panelists, jump in if there's something someone says you find outrageous or provocative. Tell us your thoughts on it. Go ahead, Andy.
I do. I use Scrivener in the early stages of the program. I don't always start out in Word, and so Scrivener has this ability where you can just sort of stockpile images and links and things that are research-oriented things. Best way to do this is by an example. So I knew I wanted to write a historical Western. This hasn't been published yet, but the image was a young girl, 15 years old, probably drawn partly inspiration from True Grit. So she tucks her hair up in her hat. She masquerades as a boy to sort of get by in this world. And the image was, she's on a wagon, she's holding a rein, she's got on a pair of gloves, she's wearing a man's black vest and a white shirt. So she looks a little bit like a kind of Old West Han Solo in the way she's dressed, And that was it. It was like, from there, like, I literally drew that picture in my sketchbook.
Mm-hmm.
And then started trying to answer the questions about that character after that. So, where is she going if she's in this wagon? Where is she headed? Why is she doing this? What's she doing this? What's she carrying in the wagon? Where's her destination? Why is she going there?
Right.
So, yeah.
So, Kimberly, do you have a concordance or any sort of separate notebook with your information?
I wish that I was as organized. I am using Scrivener for this book that I'm drafting now, and I love it because of that. And I fill notebooks, and I really like to write by hand when I'm in that part of the process. I am very visual. So like I will collect things, not necessarily faces, but images, art, music, all of the things that make me feel a character and what I feel like they're going to be like, and things that they would like or that they would have or that they would wear. And secondary characters, one of the things I'm always thinking about is what purpose they serve for my main characters in the story, and what's really going to get under the skin of my main character. What's the person that's really going to push their buttons, make them move, make them change, make them fight, whatever it is that they need to be doing. That other person has to antagonize them in that correct way. And so that goes into how I build that person too. They may be something horrible, some kind of really horrible Southern Gothic monster of a thing, or they may be the soft person that you need. And how do you make them look like that? Or how do you make them not look like that so they surprise your reader? It's not what you expect.
Right.
And that's, what Evie was saying. That's that first impression thing. And so it's kind of this push and pull to layer, you're layering onto an idea. So I start with the movements and the walking around and thinking about what this person, how they embody their skeleton. And then I layer on the things that I think represent them to me. And so it just becomes like this building project. And it's very strange, kind of zombie-ish kind of thing. And I don't know that I have a concordance necessarily, but I do have a collection of stuff, on my desk. I'll have rocks, I'll have music, I'll have paintings, I'll have whatever collects around me while I'm working, that I feel those characters.
Right. So given that, Evie, I'm assuming on your desk right now, there's a shrunken head collection.
Right.
From several different corpses and a human brain. Am I right? How close was I?
I have a raven.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I keep some creepy stuff all around me. You probably see like my whole writing space is very like and often similar. I will seek out and collect themed things about whatever I'm writing, and then that ends up collecting in here as well. But I'm the same, Kimberly. I have my visual stuff. So Scrivener, I haven't tried because I am also kind of everything out by hand. And so I will actually find pictures online and then I'll print them out in color and cut them out. I have there behind my computer right now is a bulletin board covered in all my characters for a vampire, like a Dracula based novel I'm working on. And so I went to antique stores actually, and I looked at the old like actual photographs and purchased old pictures and tintypes and things like that, so that they're all in period dress. They're all, actual characters. Same thing, music. I make there's a soundtrack for every book I've written, and actually one of Andy's that I just absolutely loved, and I could hear this music playing the whole time I read it. So I had to make one for him too, but that's because I was fangirling. But I was hard.
I know. I do the same thing, kind of obsessively.
Yeah, because it does. It's sort of like, and again, when I write, it's a movie playing in my head, and so I know the scene. I'll like lay out the scene. I know the characters that are going to be in that scene, and then I sort of just kind of let them play the scene, and then I try to collect what just happened and write it down. And that's just the way that my brain does it. So it's important for me to know what my characters look like. And then as the scene plays out, then I start getting personalities and things like that. And then it kind of is very organic in that way for me. I don't like put a lot of like notes, oh, these traits, these things. I just know what they look like. I kind of know how they move in my head, but then I just play the scene in my head and watch it. Okay. And then I write it down.
It probably is poison. And if you do this, I'll just stand corrected. It probably is poison to say this is a neurotic single mother who is, like you have to just put the character on the page and let her go through her paces. Evie, is it possible? Can you turn your camera around so you can see your wall?
Yeah.
And so help me, everybody. We're really going to get to minor characters. I haven't forgot what we're actually supposed to be talking about. We're going to do it.
So right there, I don't know. Can you see?
Nice. That's,
Yeah,
that was pretty close. A human
That's
skull.
good.
It looks like there was an effigy of something,
yeah,
possibly a monk. Yeah, it does not
There's a
look
lot of
wholesome.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on.
Nice. So let's talk about minor characters. I think, I assume your procedure for a minor character is much the same for as a major character. Presumably you don't spend as long on it. So if it's different, let me know. How much information does a minor character require? And in an email to you, I sort of opined that some people in a story aren't characters, they're furniture. If there's a cashier, she's probably just there so I can buy the chicken dinner, go home and eat my solitary meal. How much detail do you want to give to a minor character? And have any of you had minor characters that wanted to just take the ball and run with it and you had to stop them? Kimberly, you actually mentioned a case like that, so maybe you can start us off.
Yeah, in my first book, that actually happened with one of my secondary characters. She was just easier to write, and I think, having written 2 books now, that for me, my main character is harder to write, and I never like them. I don't usually like them until the end of the book, because they're closer to the bone to my own personal struggles and weaknesses, and so that your psychology is mixed up in whatever they're going through is what you're trying to work out in your own head. My secondary characters are usually people I admire, that I like, or that I think, oh, I wish I could take those traits on myself, or that sort of thing. So that secondary character was stronger in River Witch than my main character, and I took out an entire story arc for her,
right,
and backed her up, because that's not the story I was telling. She was
right,
easy to tell.
Right.
And
Yes.
in terms of, how much do you build in detail? I don't think any of my characters are furniture. I don't think, because maybe I go too far in the opposite direction. I know so much more about them than whatever that ever goes into the book or on the page. And if I don't, then they're flat on the page. There's not anything to them. And it's a weird kind of a magic trick, and it's a head game for the author. For me, I always feel like they're flat because I've not put enough in there. And I rely on other readers to tell me, and often I have too much on the page and I have to back it out a little bit. But I don't know very many authors who don't overplan like that for their characters, because we're in love with them. So we're like, we know everything. We're obsessed with them.
How many, I know this is kind of a difficult question to answer, so you can say, I have no idea. How many manuscript pages do you think you would devote to a minor character?
I have no idea.
That's a good answer. I told you that was a good answer, and it's a jolly good answer.
I really don't. I mean, you kind of know the balance when you're done, but I can't plan it ahead of time. Yeah. Not by page count anyway.
So, and Evie, you also had a problem with a minor character, and I'm going to get to you as well, Andy, with the beautiful name Lilith, which is like the best name.
Yeah.
Tell us, and Lilith was a minor character who got a little out of hand. What happened, and how did you bring her to heel?
I didn't bring her to heel. She took over, and I rewrote a whole book. I was halfway through, and she kind of showed up, and I'm like, whoa, she's really cool, and I really liked her, and so I scrapped it. I scrapped the whole thing and started over and made her the main antagonist, the villain. But then I liked her so much, I was really having a problem at the end, like, I don't want her to go away, and so for me, she just totally took over, and she was like this real just badass. I've had it, and I'm doing what I'm doing, and I don't care what anybody thinks. And I just really liked her for that. And I was like, and then the problem was, is I was building her up so much, I was losing sight of my protagonist. You know,
Right.
I was losing sight of my main character who was fighting her, and not giving her maybe as much of that well-roundedness as I was doing for Lilith. And so I really did have to go back and really take some time with her and sort of rewrite her so I didn't lose her in the process. But yeah, it happened.
It must have been kind of a surprise for you, because you describe yourself as a real plotter.
Oh, I am.
You got it. So you must have thought, like, what the hell?
I was so
you know?
mad. I was so mad, and I was just like, for days, like, I can't throw. I'm like, oh my God, like, what do I do? I don't even know where to start. Like, what do I do? And it was such a strong feeling that she needed to be the centerpiece of this story that I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And, you know, friends and people that my beta readers that I always go to, like, what do you think? We're like, are you sure are you sure? I'm like, yeah. I'm going to do it. And then it just worked. And then everything actually did start flowing pretty well. So it worked out okay. But it took a lot longer than it usually does for me. And I ended up doing some crazy like plotting techniques. I mean, I had a whiteboard, I had little like dry erase magnet things, and I was moving them around with like chapters, like, oh wait, maybe this goes here, because it rewrote everything. And I couldn't remember, did this happen in this manuscript or the other one? And I did like sort of get to know all the other characters, because she just took over. But that's the one I won the Stoker for. So I think it was probably the right decision, right? There's a reason that somebody comes along and is demanding to be, their story's demanding to be told, then maybe it's time, maybe you got to tell it.
So Andy, tell us about Andy Grubb. He was one of your characters, right? So what happened to him? Where did he come from? I love the names. We're going to come back to, like, what are the essential details for a character, and I wonder how important just the name is, or if the name can be overplayed. But tell us about Andy Grubb.
There's a lot in the name with Andy Grubb. So he was a character in The Boatman's Daughter, my second book. He's a game warden, and he's a very inept game warden. He's a fool. So he's the fool type, right? Andy was in the story for quite a while, and it sort of, I had a last name, Grubb. I didn't have a first name, and I finally, just as a joke, gave him my name, because I couldn't think of anything else, and it just seemed like, that's fair. But Andy served a purpose for a while until he didn't, and I loved him. I just thought he was an idiot, and he was there, but he was dragging my protagonist down. So, like, every time she had an interaction with Andy Grubb, she seemed like she was moving further away from, like, what I wanted her to be. She seemed dependent on him in some ways, and I just always thought, no, that's terrible. She doesn't need to be dependent on this guy. So eventually Andy kind of got the boot from the story. I think, you know, there was at one point, like, he ended up handcuffed to a tree in the woods when the dam burst at the end of that book, and he was found, I think, in part of the prologue or the epilogue, he was found half naked in a tree, you know, still handcuffed, almost drowned. It was very comic, but he didn't fit the tone of the book. He didn't help my protagonist in any way be a better protagonist, and so I had to give him that.
Right. So Kimberly and Evie, you both got some dramatic experience in your backgrounds. And Andy, I know you evidently you draw, at least to some extent. Do you also have any drama background?
I don't. No.
You don't? But drawing your characters is something you do that helps you visualize them or imagine how they interact?
I'm very visual. Just sort of like it's an instinct, kind of like storyboarding in a way, or comic book. Yeah.
And a lot of you will have seen the series. I loved it, and some people didn't. And if you didn't, so there's just more of it for me. Was Queen's Gambit. And I think what made Queen's Gambit, one of the things that made it work so well, not only is the central character compelling, every single character felt like, I'm a complete person. The story is about me. And yet they were reined in, you know, the mother, the janitor who taught her chess, and the weird little hillbilly, the hillbilly chess star who was the superstar in his little world but lived in his mother's basement. What sort of details are you guys looking for in a minor character? Like you're going to limit yourself to a certain number of pages, and heaven help you if you come across a Lilith or an Andy Grubb. But how do you, like, what is the minimum requirement? These are the 3 strokes that, or, 5 or 7 that you think you would want to get. And anybody can start who just wants to leap in here.
Andy, you need to go first.
I will. I mean,
yeah, Andy.
For me, they just have to serve a purpose, and they can't detract. They can't pull focus. So,
right.
But they also have to be, if not, I mean, it's true. It's like not every person in the story is going to be a full-fledged character, but they do have to be human. And so for me, a minor character is a grace note. It's an accentuation of something. A character in a store who sells a cake in a grocery store has to have a particular way of speaking so that they are humanized or memorable. Because I think minor characters, even if they are not full-fledged major characters, they have their human dignity too, right? So, so that for me is really it. They just have to have a purpose, whether they're a helper character, whether they're an antagonist to the major characters.
So, and I think Kimberly sort of alluded to this too. Like, do you see your minor characters as spoils to sort of show off some aspect of the character? So Kimberly, you talked about, characters, you chose people you admire as your minor characters. Is that designed to sort of show off your own character's potential weaknesses or shortcomings, or is that a general?
Yeah, I guess so. When I say admire, I mean, there are things about them that are compelling to me. And that can be for better or worse. I can really get in, I can dig a villain just as well as I can an angel in my story. So I think I agree with what Andy said. It's not, size doesn't matter. That's what it comes down to. It's influence. It's a moment on screen, whether it's a really small character or if it's a secondary character that moves through the entire arc with your main characters. It's somebody that moves the story along, and they need to be the twinkle in your eye, I think, as the writer for your story. They need to be that little sparkle at the edges all the time, and the surprise that you get, because I write a darker story, because I deal with themes that are Southern Gothic, and I think this is true for all 3 of us. You have to have these characters that hit on the genre. They tend to show up as my secondary characters more than my main character, and they also are often the light in the work for me, or the hope that my main character finds in the darker points of the story, and in the conclusion somehow, whatever they're learning, whatever they're evolving from. Even if you end in tragedy, that's kind of where I go with that. They're kind of the stars in the sky for my character.
It's interesting. I want to come back to that, because it's sort of counterintuitive that you're writing dark fiction, and yet you want typically you want your minor characters to be sources of light.
Dark fiction is always about hope.
So Evie, what would you comment on that? What do you look for? Like, what are your essential? These are the things I need to see before I know the character is complete enough to even be a minor character.
First of all, if they're going to have dialogue, if they're going to have interaction with one of my main characters in the book, they need to be, like Andy said, like a full-fledged human, right? So if they have nothing to add to it, if they have nothing to bring to the table, then I'm not writing them in. Like, if they're the cashier at the grocery store and they just went and bought something, then I'll say they went and bought something. I don't need to have an interaction with the cashier or even describe the fact that there was one. If they're there for a reason. And sometimes it's bringing the hope. Sometimes they're the comic relief, because you need those moments in especially dark fiction, and so they make great comic relief characters too, right? Because you don't want your main character in some serious situation making jokes all the time. That doesn't really work. But your minor characters can come along and make you laugh, or they can do make some comment that's a perfect foreshadow. So it's what I need them to do in that moment is I guess how much fleshing out they get, but they should always feel like a human. We're all heroes of our own story, right?
Right.
But we're also all background characters in somebody else's. If you think about, sometimes it's weird thing to think about, but I think about sometimes like how many people's vacation pictures am I in the background of? Have you ever thought about like how many pictures of me are there out there because I'm in the background and I'm a nobody. I'm just a set piece to somebody else's story. Right. So I try to remember that too for my minor characters. Like they have a life too. They have their whole thing going on. So I try to be true to that. But also if they're in my story, if they're speaking, if they're interacting, there's a reason. And that's really the most important thing. What's that reason? And that helps me to sort of flesh them out.
So this is maybe something you don't want to admit to, like when you guys are in a public space, like a restaurant, do you spend any time just, not obtrusively, but just to eavesdrop a little bit? Evie's already nodding. Oh yes. Oh yeah.
All
the time.
Just
all the time.
Imagine the story behind this character. Who is this person? Something.
It's why I have to write at home. I can't write out. I see writers talk about being at the coffee shop. I'm like, oh hell no. Because all I do is listen and watch other people, and I'm lost in them. I'm just fascinated with other people. So the one thing I will say about this before you move on, because I've read enough of both Andy's and Evie's work to know that they're very good at their secondary characters. And one of the things that I like and that I think is really important is that you don't write a trope. Your secondary characters, they're purposeful, but they're not caricatures. And I think what you were saying about being in a background of a photo, that rings so true for when I read your work. You're aware and you're making choices. Andy's making choices like with Andy Grubb. And sometimes the things that you write out because of those choices are the things that win you awards. It's the same thing. I won Georgia Author of the Year with River Witch. And I think probably because I backed out of that secondary character and made those choices. I didn't leave her in a tree half naked, by the way, which I love.
He lived. Great.
Be careful if you're an unruly character in one of Andy's novels. Just cut you no slack, man.
Actually,
I mean, the
half naked part is kind of
true. Drowning is one thing. Just half naked is a little cruel.
If you're in one of my stories and you're a minor character and I love you, you're in more danger than a minor character.
That's true.
That I don't love you.
Yeah.
I'll leave you naked in a tree, but you'll be alive. If you're a minor character and I love you, you're probably in trouble.
Right. And even a major character can run into hard water. I think of, we're talking about minor characters and we talked about drama. And I think of old Alfred Hitchcock movies. And he has these charming minor characters. So in The Birds, there's this lady, you know who she is. She's got like a beret on and a tweed vest, and she talks like this.
No, she's dead.
And they're charming. I love it. And yet there's such types. And I think there's a powerful gravitational pull. You're creating a minor character. I'm only going to give this guy a paragraph or maybe a couple of pages, dispersed through the book. How do you avoid, because I'm assuming it, it's a temptation to say, okay, I need this sweet, educated woman. I need the hard-bitten Waffle House waitress. Like, how do you pull away? Like, what are some tricks? Or maybe you can give us a specific example where you made the character zig instead of zag. And again, anybody who wants to jump in can do so.
Well, I don't know about a specific example for my work, but I will say that, like, you take the waitress example that you just mentioned. And we were talking earlier about when we go to coffee shops or whatever, we watch people, we observe people. I always try to pull from that. So during the pandemic, Crystal and I, after the pandemic, I guess when things opened up again, let me put it that way. Technically, I think we're still dealing with the pandemic. When things opened up, we went to IHOP, and IHOP had changed, the way they set up their booth. They're keeping people kind of apart. And we hadn't been in a restaurant for a while, and the waitress is, bringing our servers, bringing our food and our coffee and refilling. Wonderfully nice. There's a table behind us that people have left, and the server comes up to our table and she says, "Did you see anybody leave? The two people who were there."
I think we just lost
Oh
Andy.
no, we lost him.
Oh no. Maybe he'll rejoin us.
There
are two people here.
What happened to the people?
I hope he's not in a tree. That's all I can say. So Ann, Kimberly, rather, or Evie, do you want to tell us about a time that you eavesdropped in a story or in a place?
Following up that,
Yeah,
right, I know.
Especially
Like,
with cliffhanger,
all I was gonna say was, what I tend to do is to try to keep it from being a cliche or a trope or something. I know I want that type, so I will put them in an unexpected, like, it's not the waitress, she's a librarian, but she's got that sassy, waitress, tell it like it is kind of feel, but she's a librarian and she's dressed very conservatively. She's not that, what you were expecting. So just, that's what I try to do is take that personality type maybe, but Andy's back, so I'm shutting up because we all want to
tell us the story. You really had us hanging. Are you there? I think you're muted. There we go.
Yeah. Sorry, my laptop died. But anyway, long story short, what I was saying was basically I just observed that in that situation, there was this human moment where the server had noticed that the people at the table had left without tipping, and she had kind of gone through a hellacious sort of ordeal with serving them and bringing their food back and this and that and forth. And she was just sort of asking us in this vulnerable moment, "Did you see these idiots leave without tipping? Like, did they just get up and leave, or did they go to the bathroom?" And we're like, sorry. But it's kind of just like drawing from something that happened, finding a way to take that type. If you want to start with a type, that's fine, but moving away from the type as quickly as you can with just the barest amount of effort.
I'll take the privilege of the panel host or whatever my title is. Here's a story of mine. It was a Waffle House waitress, and it's breakfast. And there was a young waitress. She looked to me like she was 19, and there was a much older waitress or server who had a bad hip, and she, walking for her was a struggle. And someone had tipped the younger waitress $100 bill. And the older waitress walked over and wanted to give it to her and was so happy that the younger waitress had gotten it. She wanted to be the one to give it to her. And that little moment just captured a whole relationship for me. And it was all there. I just saw the depth to those two people that was unexpected. Did you? I don't. Andy's story was so compelling because of the shocking drop off. Did you want to tell us about an eavesdropping experience you had, Evie? Did we finish it? I don't recall.
I'm sorry.
No, please, Andy. I mean, I guess we're all in waitresses. So I had one where she was our waitress, and then she was the table beside us and the table behind us too. And she was like there, that was her section. And she was like stopping and playing with the baby at the side. And I was like, oh, what a nice girl. And she was super like, just real easy to chat with. And then I started to realize what a terrible waitress she was, because she wasn't doing anything. She was,
farming,
socializing, and like, and then it got worse as the people behind us wanted to send a drink back. They were like, this doesn't taste like a Long Island iced tea. And she was like, well, what do you mean? I made that, and I used to be a bartender. And then she got like super mean. And then it just became this terrible thing where the three of our tables were sort of manning together because she was out of control. She just slowly, gradually became worse and worse as the night went on. And yeah, so our first impression, this is that person who the first impression was completely wrong. Like I was like, oh, she's so cool. This is, you know, this is gonna be a fun night. She's super fun. It's gonna be fun. And then she just got worse and worse and worse until the table behind us actually left and left and didn't pay at all. Like they just took off. And then she was like, that's it, I'll be back. And she takes off after them and like runs away and like leaves the restaurant. And then she came back. She's like, well, this is probably going to be my last night. I hope you guys know that. And I hope you realize how awful that is when you don't tip a waitress and when you leave. It was just like, whoa, it was crazy. But yeah, you get to know these people. But I was just thinking about your story actually as you were saying it, and what a very, very small interaction of two people that you knew for just a very short time. That one little action told you everything you need to know about both of those people in a way that you got two well-rounded characters in a very, very short moment. And that really, those are the type of things I think you want to build in, so that you don't have to spend a long time explaining who these people are, because that one tiny moment said who they were, you know. And that's all you need.
You sort of seem to say, and I think this is a truism, that, you know, you can't have a character in isolation. A person in a room alone, you know, unless he's plotting a murder, but that still involves another character. How much of your minor characters are sort of called into being out of what your major character needs from them in terms of creating a story? And Evie, I'll start with you, but I want to talk to Kimberly and Andy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm plotting out a story right now in my outline, and it's really focused on a married couple and sort of this, you know, is this house haunted? Is it not? And whether he believes her, and she, and
yes, it is.
Right? Of course it is. But it was also this idea that, whoa, they both need an advocate, you know. And it was like I was having like this relation, like digging into their marriage and their relationship in the past, and things he's done and things she's done that make both of them questionable. Who do you trust? And it occurred to me that, geez, the only interaction I'm showing is the two of them, and a marriage, you know, a relationship between a husband and a wife, or two spouses, is very different. You're a very different person with this person than you might be with your best friend or another friend. And I was like, oh shoot, I need to bring a friend in for each of them. And that's when, you know, two new characters came in, and then all of a sudden I had a thicker plot, a much better, all of a sudden those two characters came in and like, here's what I'm going to do for you. And it blew the plot up perfectly, exactly what I needed. So yeah, it's those moments where you have to go, wait a minute. I'm only showing one side of this person's personality, and I need to get them out of here.
Right. I think that's nice that you have these other forces, these other characters are pulling your two protagonists presumably in opposite directions.
Yep.
Neither of them is a marriage counselor, I assume.
No. In fact, the female character is the husband's sister. So then that also adds a little bit of a interesting. It's your sister. Whose side is she going to take?
Yes. Yes. That is interesting. That's not what I would have expected, but that's nice.
Right. Yeah.
So Kimberly, how about you?
I was just listening to her, and I was thinking, you know, advice that I give to my kids, each of my three children, at some point we've sat down and had the basic conversation where you explain to them that nobody else is thinking about them. You think about you spend all your time thinking about yourself. Other people are not worried about you. They're not paying attention to you, which is kind of the opposite of what we just said about being writers and being eavesdroppers and grand observers. So we're kind of a separate breed. Most of my work on my main character is because I have this person who is inside their own head, right? And like what you're saying about this married couple, they're very insular. And your secondary characters, their job is to make your main character look up and see it differently, have a different perspective, have a moment of realization that something else is going on in the world around me besides whatever it is that they're struggling with. So when I'm building my secondary characters into my story, that's their job.
So Andy, how about you? Do you feel that your major characters are eliciting from your minor characters what's needed for the story, or is there a different process there?
Well, yes, for the most part, yes. I read a lot of Robert McKee, and I know how, like, when you say Robert McKee's name, like it's a polar reaction. People are like, oh yeah, or like there's no middle ground with what people think of Robert McKee. But his book on character is interesting. It's really good, but it's like it takes. I will admit it takes writing and the craft and kind of dissects it down to like a science, and that doesn't work for a lot of people. So I'm not necessarily recommending the book. But one of the techniques that he talks about with minor characters is this idea of creating a diagram, which is essentially like an orbit. So at the center of that diagram, you have a circle that is your major character. And all of the other characters in the story somehow revolve around, orbit that central character. And the further the characters are in the diagram, out away from the central character, the less important they are to the story. So the closer you get, the more important you are.
Right.
And with the characters who are closer to the center, those minor characters have to have a little more dimensionality, a little more complexity to them than the characters that are further out. I don't do that all the time, but I did kind of do it with my most recent novel, The Hollow Kind, when I was in revision, and which is kind of weird to do it that late in the process, but it was a technique that I learned kind of late. And so I sat down and I did it with my characters, and I just sort of mapped them out to see where they all fit. And it was an interesting sort of learning process for me of like, sort of how do you look at your characters and their relationships to one another. So.
This is sort of a different topic. We didn't do things on maybe next year, a panel on craft books. I find the sort of craft books that you're talking about both enlightening and frustrating. Part of it is like, this is it. This is actually the thing itself. This is what I'm doing. And then if I try to do it, it's just dead. It's just horrible. But I think what you do, like you, I use that sort of thing after I've written the story as sort of it's sort of a trouble check or with troubleshooting. And I look at it and say, okay, what's my pacing like? And so, yeah, if you have a real peripheral character who's demanding a lot of space, maybe cut him back. I wonder if this is a truism or if you'd comment on it. I sort of picked this up from the three of you, that your major characters, to some extent, you may want to deny this, are projections of yourself to some degree. Because we know Evie's a badass, that's just clear. And
I mean, obviously.
Your minor characters, maybe not. They're based on people. They're more likely to be based on people you've encountered rather than people you would imagine yourself as. Is that true, or is that overstating it? Maybe overstating it.
It's a mix for me. It really, I mean, they all spring from you to some extent. They just spring from different elements and whatever you're exploring for that particular character. They're all pinging off the same radio tower, right? So it's just a matter of what station you're tuned into, for me.
Have any of you ever had a character that you simply could not get into the head of? You simply could not develop, or you had tremendous difficulty developing sufficient empathy to create them and portray them?
Yeah.
I see you nodding, Kimberly. Who's a character for you?
Both my main characters in both my current novels. I find them the most difficult. I struggle with them through the whole thing. The external plot is fine, but the internal, I always find them to be frustrating. I always want them to, I feel like I have to drag them kicking and screaming to the point of change in the novel.
Right.
Whereas I don't feel that frustration usually with my secondary characters. They move along their arc and do their thing, and they just seem easy to me. My main characters are much harder. Right. I don't know why that is, but I probably should see a therapist.
Maybe so. Well, you're starting with a problem that's tough to solve. Nobody wants to change. Nobody wants to change, in my experience.
Yeah.
So what about you, Evie? Has there been characters that you just really, particularly minor characters, but major characters as well, that you thought, I just cannot crack this shell?
No, because I think for me, you were pretty right on. My main characters are almost always some extension of me, and so it's either a lot of me, or it's a person that I imagined I wanted to be when I was a teenager. You know what I mean? The way that you imagined your life, or who you were going to be, or this cool version of yourself, or that inner dark version that you don't really want to share with anybody. I tend to put that in my villains, and so a lot of them are just me, and I have to sort of let that part of me kind of take over. And then my minor characters are often like Kimberly said, people that I know, admire, people that I like, that I've gotten to know really well, or that I really have I don't know, that have really taken on a personality in my life, or a big part of my life, even if they weren't huge part. Like, for instance, in Children of Demeter, there is a realtor who sells her the house, and that realtor is based on the realtor who sold me a house. And I really only worked with her for that short of time. I mean, we're friends, and she knows she's that character, because I called her up and said, you're gonna know as soon as you read this book, like, it's you. And she was, yeah, do it, it's fun. But I didn't know her for long, but I knew her long enough that she made an impression of me, and I loved her exuberance, and so that's what I wanted. So my minor characters are almost always people that I know, and so I try to do justice by them.
And I'm looking at the chat. So people in the panel or whatever, if you have a question, go ahead and type it in. We've just got a few more minutes. Tell us about, are your minor characters, are they somehow different substantially to you, or do you feel like your major characters are projections of yourself? Andy?
Oh, for me.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm looking at you. Can't you tell?
Right. Yeah, or they're projections of people I know, or people that have been close and personal to me. And the harder characters to get into, that's always way in for me, is okay, but everybody's human. So yes, this person may be incredibly cruel, this person may be incredibly mean, but maybe this person also reads bedtime stories to his son,
right,
something like that.
I think
which kind of like in our Q&A, like one of the questions that we have, Lance asked, would the villain have their own orbiting secondary characters? And the answer is yes. So like a villain would have characters that would show his or her their villainous side, and they would have characters that have to show the other side too. So like there's the minor characters, right? Right. So absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and it's these are such cliches, but that's where my mind immediately goes. You think of the Austin Powers villain who's always got the big fluffy version, and you sort of think he can't be all bad. He's got a big fluffy version. This is perhaps the final question. We've just got 4 minutes. I know Andy and Evie, you've got a story about this. Is there a minor character of your own, or from another work of fiction, that you thought, I want to build a story around this person? Start us off, Evie.
Well, my answer.
I know, I'm cheating. Of course, I know.
You are. Yeah, actually, so I showed you guys my Dracula character cast. That is all based on the character Renfield, and I really wanted to dive in a little bit to that character. But being the writer who I am, I thought, what if Renfield was actually a woman, and she was in the asylum for hysteria, because hysteria is historically all about the womb and blood and bleed. It all just seemed like, well, of course. And then it kind of flowed from there. Well, it was Victorian time, so we can't have too many women, in this story. We can't. It's about the men and the heroes. And so what if this was a big conspiracy to keep Renfield and Mina, these small characters and let the men be the heroes, but really the true story is this. And so I kind of played around with that based on Renfield and that little interaction with Mina, and I started that kind of started the ball rolling.
And Andy, you're also working on a minor character from Dracula. So Dracula's got a lot of pull.
Oh yeah.
Well, no, I'm not working on it. But this
Oh, you considered it.
This is a dream project. Yeah. Crystal and I have actually talked about writing something together, and the thing that we kind of kick around is a kind of life and times of Quincy Morris. So a sort of Western that deals with Quincy before Dracula and possibly even after Dracula, because I think there's a little gray area there with that character. So
right,
definitely.
I think it's a high mark of success for a minor character that they're so compelling that you would like to know more about them, and you can't help yourself but to imagine more about them. Kimberly, have you ever had a character either from your own fiction or from someone else's? I suspect I'm just going to push you that your story that begins in Roanoke, that there must have been a desire to have these silenced voices come out. So can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had to make some choices about that for sure, but in terms of secondary characters and silenced voices, I think I never lose a character that I pull out of a story. They always are something that I put in a file, and I think, okay, you're a soul that I'm still exploring, and I find another place to tuck them in somewhere along the way.
Right.
And people will ask the same thing. They'll always ask about sequels. And I always say yes and no. And I think it applies here to secondary characters that you pull out or want to give a voice to in another story. As a writer, I am exploring certain themes and certain questions that I want to answer. You know, it's your existential thing as a writer, and that's what you put into your work. And each of my stories will continue to deal with those same questions and themes until I work it out, whatever it is I'm working out that makes it interesting to me. So those things reappear, and sometimes the characters reappear too, but they're just, I put them in a whole different skin suit. You know, it's a whole different, here you go, let's try it out again and see what happens. There's a trend right now in historical fiction for sure with pulling out those voices that have been marginalized or overlooked, people that are in the wings on the stage. Right. One of the trips that we took this summer out to the Outer Banks for events, we went and did tours of the where the plane took off for the Wright brothers. And here are these photos of them with their sister, who really seemed to hold the whole circus together. But do you know anything about? No. And so those kinds of, like you're saying, lost voices, they always intrigue me. I always want to look. I always want to ask the question, who was behind the scenes? Who's really driving the wagon here? What's the real story? So yeah. And that Stoker thing, you guys are, we have a mutual friend. I'm going to talk to you guys when we get off of here. I got things to say.
Renfield is a charming character. So guys, this is our time. It's been a wonderful panel. Thank you so much. The time has sort of flown. For the people in our Zoom audience out there in cyberspace, I hope you enjoyed it and got something from it. And so I'll just bid everybody so long. So long, everybody. Have a great weekend. I'll see a couple of you tomorrow, I believe.
Yeah.
So long.
Bye.